Hey there. Tonight we drift back to a world of cloisters, candles, and curious rules. So, before you settle deeper under the covers, make sure you're comfortable. And if you enjoy this kind of slow wandering through history, you might gently tap subscribe or like, only if it pleases you, of course. No pressure. Now, breathe easy. Let your shoulders soften, and imagine yourself lying in a small stone chamber. You wake before dawn, not because you're particularly enthusiastic about the day ahead, but because the monastery bell has rung, summoning you for matins. It's somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, the kind of hour when even owls are reconsidering their life choices. A single candle flickers in the corner, its flame guttering with every draft that squeezes through the cracks in the shutters. The light is meant to guide you, though it mostly throws shadows that make the room look like it's filled with lurking monks, which it isn't, probably. The air is sharp and cold. You pull your rough woolen habit around your shoulders, but it's about as comforting as wrapping yourself in a doormat. Your breath comes out in faint puffs, little clouds that dissolve before you can admire them. The scent of tallow hangs heavy, that peculiar animal fat tang that clings to everything, your bedding, your robes, even your hair. It's not a fragrance you'd bottle unless your goal was to repel absolutely everyone. On the floor beside your straw mattress lies a pair of sandals. You slip your feet into them and instantly regret the decision because the stone beneath is colder than the sandals themselves. For a moment you consider staying put, pretending to be pious in spirit while conveniently absent in body. But then you remember, rules are rules. Monastic life is strict, and even half-asleep monks are expected to rise for prayer. Reality check. In the Middle Ages, skipping morning worship wasn't just frowned upon. It could earn you some rather creative penances, like copying scripture until your hand cramped, or tending latrines by candlelight. You stand, stretch, and let your fingers brush against the wall. The stones are damp, they always are. Moisture beads in the mortar, cold and clammy, reminding you that insulation wasn't a medieval strong point. Somewhere above, a beam creaks as the wind shifts outside. You can almost hear the sigh of the building itself, as though the monastery is just as weary of the hour as you are. The candle sputters, briefly threatening to go out altogether. If it does, you'll be left in complete darkness, and stumbling through corridors at 3 in the morning with no light is less holy pilgrimage and more bruised shins. So you gently cup your hand around the flame, shielding it from the draft. Wax drips down the side, warm against your knuckle. You hiss softly, though you know better than to complain aloud. A monk's patience, after all, is supposed to be infinite, or at least longer than the lifespan of a candle stub. You make your way toward the door. The hinges groan as you open it, the sound far louder than you intended. You pause, listening. Down the hall, you hear other doors opening, sandals scraping, low coughs as your fellow brothers shuffle awake. The monastery stirs like a hive, each monk rising because that one candle flame in his room has signaled the same relentless truth. It is time. Time to leave behind what little warmth you had. Time to join the long procession to the chapel. Time to meet the day that always begins in darkness. And as you step into the corridor, you notice the dim glow of candles carried by others, tiny stars in the stone passage. Together, those little flames will guide you toward prayer. Softly, you move forward, and the chapel doors wait ahead, where stricter candle rules still flicker. You move slowly along the corridor, following the faint shuffle of sandals ahead of you. The chapel doors stand open, their heavy wood smelling faintly of beeswax and damp oak. Inside, the air is cool and carries that familiar mixture of scents: stone that never quite dries, smoke curling upward, and the steady sweetness of melting wax. The candlelight softens every hard edge, bathing the benches and columns in a gentle glow that makes even cold stone look inviting. Almost. You join the line of monks filing toward their places. The chapel is lit carefully, deliberately, not just with random candles stuck wherever there's space, but with a pattern that follows the rule of Saint Benedict. Candles mark the altar, candles burn at the lectern, and candles hang in iron sconces along the walls. Some are tall, some are squat, and all are placed with what looks like reverence but is really just rules. And rules here are not merely suggestions. You glance at the altar and notice one brother adjusting a taper with precise movements. He knows which flame must be extinguished first when the service ends. Not second, not last, first. Because the rule is clear, order matters. It's comforting, in a way, this idea that God is paying close attention to candle choreography at 3 in the morning. Comforting or mildly unnerving? The chanting begins. Low, steady voices rising and falling, a tide of psalms carried on breath and candlelight. You mouth the words, your own voice blending into the hum of the group. The flickering light catches the pages of the Psalter, illuminating lines of ink written long before your time. The letters glisten faintly, each stroke a reminder that human hands, cramped and weary, carry these prayers forward for you to recite. You wonder briefly if they too struggle to stay awake. A candle guttering at the side draws your eye. Wax pools unevenly, threatening to spill onto the stone floor. You imagine the prior's expression if that happened, the kind of calm disappointment that somehow feels worse than outright anger. Reality check. In a world where famine and plague are real concerns, one wasted candle might seem trivial, but here it's nearly sacrilege. Wax is expensive, after all. You shift on your bench, feeling the coarse wood press into your thighs. The chapel's air grows heavy with smoke. It curls slowly upward, tracing shadows across the vaulted ceiling. Your throat scratches a little, and you stifle a cough. That, too, would draw notice, though not the good kind. Monastic life is about silence, discipline, and the occasional subtle competition over who can appear the most serene while secretly choking on soot. The chanting flows on, rising and falling with the rhythm of time measured in wax. A tall candle marked with notches burns slowly at the lectern, each line measuring the passing of prayers. Candle clocks, they call them. The idea is simple. As the candle melts down to the next mark, an hour has passed. Of course, if the wick bends or the wax pools unevenly, your hour can feel suspiciously longer. Peculiar, yes, but no one dares argue with the flame. The service ends. One brother rises, moving with ritual precision. He begins to snuff out the candles, starting with the prescribed taper. You watch, aware that if he extinguishes the wrong one first, it could mean penance. Not eternal damnation, though who knows, depending on which monk you ask, but certainly a long lecture and maybe an extra round of chores. Reality check. You're here to cultivate spiritual humility, and yet the greatest source of tension at this hour might be a hierarchy of candles. The room grows dimmer, shadows gathering as each flame disappears with a faint hiss. The final light remains at the altar, a solitary glow against the darkness. You lower your head, offering a last whispered prayer. The brothers around you chant without pause, voices weaving together into something almost hypnotic. Your own tone wavers, catching now and then as you lose your place. Fortunately, the collective sound is forgiving. Your missed syllables drown in the harmony. The candle, however, is less forgiving. Its notch looms closer, the wax collapsing unevenly. You realize with mild dread that the supposed hour of this prayer might actually last another 20 minutes, depending on how the wick behaves. You glance to the side and catch another brother squinting at the flame with the same weary suspicion. There is silent camaraderie in this, all of you tethered to a stub of wax, waiting for deliverance not from sin but from chanting. Your voice dips lower, blending until you can barely hear yourself. The darkness presses in at the edges, broken only by those patient flames, each candle stubbornly reminding you that time here belongs not to you, but to the wax. At last, the notch is reached. The flame wobbles at its mark, and you know the hour has been declared complete. Relief slides over your shoulders like a heavy cloak being lifted. The voices around you taper off one by one until silence swells in the chapel once more. The candle still burns, of course, because nothing in the Middle Ages is efficient, but its symbolic duty is fulfilled. You rise with the others, knees stiff, eyes sore from squinting. The candle clock has dictated enough prayer for now. And so you shuffle back through the dim corridors toward your straw mattress, hoping for a brief stretch of rest before the next bell calls. And as you slip once more into the cold passage, you already know the rest will not last long. Soon enough, the candle in your chamber will flicker again, reminding you that dawn, and another round of ritual, lies close at hand. You leave the chapel in a thin stream of brothers, your sandals whispering across the stone floor. The air in the corridor is cooler than before, as if the candles back in the chapel had been holding all the warmth hostage. You tug your woolen sleeves closer to your wrists and follow the familiar path to your chamber. Ahead, the faint glow of a few scattered tapers lights the way, their flames bending in the drafts that snake through every gap in the monastery's walls. You reach your narrow cell, the door creaking softly as you push it open. Inside, your straw mattress waits, uneven and lumpy, but at this hour, it may as well be a feather bed. The candle in your room is little more than a stub, its wick curled and blackened, flames sputtering in the chill. You place it near the low stool by your bedding, hoping it lasts long enough to grant you comfort while you drift back to sleep. Medieval monks, after all, were allowed a second rest after matins, a small concession to the fact that even the holiest of men have eyelids that grow heavy. You lower yourself onto the straw pallet, shifting until the sharp stalks poke you in fewer places. A faint, musty smell rises from the bedding, mixed with the lingering aroma of tallow smoke from your candle. Your body longs for sleep, yet your mind still hums with psalms. The rhythm of chanting clings to you like a melody you can't quite shake. You close your eyes and try to follow the quiet, but the room seems alive with small sounds, the wind pressing against the shutters, the distant murmur of another monk coughing down the hall, the faint drip of water seeping somewhere behind the stone. The candle sputters again, its flame nearly surrendering to a draft. You open your eyes in time to see the wick steady itself, as if deciding to cling to life just a little longer. You wonder idly whether saints in heaven concern themselves with such trivial moments, whether divine beings watch candles flutter and remark approvingly when they survive the breeze. Reality check. More likely, the saints are occupied with larger matters, leaving you alone to worry about whether you'll spend the next hour in comforting light or complete darkness. You turn on your side, pulling your robe tighter. Monks in the Middle Ages did not own personal blankets. Often, their sleeping garment doubled as their covering, which means you are attempting to rest in fabric that has absorbed a day's worth of cold, sweat, and a faint odor of smoke. It is not luxurious. Still, the coarse wool offers a rough kind of warmth, and you nestle into it with a sigh. Your eyelids droop, but sleep refuses to come. Then the last candle is snuffed, and the chapel falls into near silence. Only the faint sound of sandals echoes as the brothers begin to file back toward their cells. You rise, stretching legs that have grown stiff from stillness, and follow. The air feels cooler without the flames. the corridor ahead dimmer and more uncertain. Your eyes ache slightly from staring into flickering light. The irony is not lost on you. Monastic life is designed around prayer and rest, yet the hours of broken sleep often deliver more of one than the other. A peculiar medieval cure for sleeplessness involved drinking warmed milk mixed with crushed herbs, though here in the cloister you have no such comforts. Instead, you are left with your thoughts and the wavering shadow of your candle climbing up the wall. Minutes stretch, measured only by the shrinking stub of wax. You breathe in the faint sweetness of melting tallow, mixed with the earthy scent of straw beneath your head. The ceiling above disappears into shadow, the kind that makes you imagine patterns in the stonework, faces perhaps, or the vague outline of an angel's wing. Your mind wanders in slow, drowsy spirals. You count breaths, you count the quiet ticks of dripping water. You even count the straw stalks poking against your wrist. None of it seems to hurry sleep along. Reality check. If monks had invented sheep counting as a pastime, you'd be leading the flock by now. Eventually, your body does surrender. Your breaths lengthen, your muscles loosen, and the chant still ringing faintly in your memory softens into something like a lullaby. The candle beside you gutters lower, its light dwindling until the room grows heavy with darkness, and yet you are too far gone into drowsiness to notice. When the bell calls again, its deep toll rolling through the cloister, you will rise once more to the rhythm of the monastery. But for now, in this flicker of rest between prayers, you lie in the quiet, somewhere between wakefulness and dream. And as you sink deeper, you know that the next stirrings of the day will bring with them the scent of bread and the curious glow of yet more candles. Still, there is comfort in knowing you've passed this hour without error, no wax spilled, no candles snuffed in the wrong sequence. And as you step back into the hall, you think of your straw bed waiting. A brief rest lies ahead, though whether sleep will come is another matter entirely. Still, the promise of warmth, or at least the memory of it, draws you onward toward your chamber, where another flickering stub of candle awaits. You remain in the chapel, shoulders hunched beneath the heavy folds of your woolen habit. The service continues, psalms flowing one into the next, and you find yourself staring at the candle on the lectern. It is marked with faint horizontal lines scratched into the wax, each meant to represent an hour of prayer. This is, in theory, a clever medieval timekeeping device. In practice, it is a slightly melted stick of animal fat pretending to be a clock. Your voice joins the others, low and steady, filling the space with a droning chant. The words rise and fall like waves on a shore, steady enough to lull you into a trance, if not for the constant shifting of your weight on the hard wooden bench. The candle's flame wavers, throwing light across the page of the psalter in front of you. The ink letters shimmer faintly, though your eyes keep blurring them into shapes that look suspiciously like tiny marching ants. You glance up at the candle again. The flame is burning a little too quickly, racing down toward the next notch. That means the hour may pass sooner than expected, a mercy you hardly dare to hope for. Of course, sometimes the opposite happens. The wick bends, or a draft slows the melt, and suddenly your hour stretches into a mysterious medieval eternity. Reality check. You have no wristwatch, no sundial indoors, and no option to sneak a peek at your phone. You have only wax and patience, and the latter is running thin. The chanting continues, echoing off the stone walls. Smoke from a dozen tapers rises slowly, pooling near the rafters. You feel it catch in your throat, a dryness that makes you swallow hard. Someone coughs softly down the row, a reminder that even the most disciplined of brothers have lungs. The prior's head lifts and silence falls for a beat, as if to suggest the cough was not only ill-timed, but perhaps spiritually suspect. The candle sputters. A glob of melted wax slides down its side and drips onto the iron holder with a faint hiss. You watch it harden, pale against the blackened metal. Once, you heard an older monk insist that a candle burning unevenly was a sign of restless spirits. It's a curious superstition, especially since restless spirits seem to have a remarkable interest in monastery schedules. Still, when the wax leans too far to one side, you can't help but wonder if the afterlife is trying to tamper with your bedtime. You shift your weight again, toes curling against the cool stone floor. The sandals are thin, the kind that barely pretend to keep you warm. Your knees ache from kneeling and rising again and again, in rhythm with the Psalms. Reality check. Holiness may nourish the soul, but it does very little for stiff joints. You rub your palms together, feeling the slight stickiness of wax residue left from shielding your candle earlier. Even prayer seems to leave a film of tallow on your skin. You wake again, this time not to bells or chants, but to the faint smell of breakfast sneaking into your chamber. It's a mixture of scents that is both comforting and underwhelming, the heavy tang of tallow from the candle on your stool and the simple aroma of coarse bread crusts carried faintly through the corridor. It is not a feast, not even close, but in the dim hours before dawn, your stomach insists that bread alone could be the height of indulgence. And as you walk, your belly faintly warmed by bread and beer, you know your next task lies in the scriptorium, where candles will serve a far different purpose. You leave the refectory with the faint taste of bread still clinging to your teeth, and your feet carry you toward the scriptorium. The hallways feel colder here, the stone somehow sharper, as though it knows the work ahead requires stillness more than warmth. You trail your fingers along the wall, the dampness seeping into your skin, before pushing open the heavy door. Inside, the scriptorium breathes with silence. Long wooden desks line the room, each holding a parchment stretched taut, waiting for ink to give it purpose. The air smells of vellum, that curious blend of animal hide and chalky dust, mixed with the ever-present perfume of tallow. Candles burn here too, though sparingly. Wax is precious, after all, and the rule of thrift means one stub of light is expected to serve 3 sets of eyes. You take your place at a desk already shared by 2 weary brothers. Between you, a single candle sputters bravely, its flame bending toward whichever monk leans closest. You angle your body to catch enough light to see the black ink against the pale skin of the parchment. Squinting has become a profession in its own right. Reality check. If medieval monastic life granted degrees, yours would be in advanced peering into semi-darkness. Your quill rests in the small horn inkwell at the side, its tip cut with care earlier in the week. You lift it, test the point with a soft scratch against the margin, and then lower it toward the page. The first stroke flows, dark and smooth. The candle trembles. A drop of wax falls from its side, splattering dangerously close to the fresh line of text. You pull the parchment slightly away, breathing relief as the wax hardens into a misshapen lump just short of the sacred word. Somewhere in the archives, another manuscript will bear a scar of wax, a reminder that even holy work can be blemished by a careless flame. The hours in the scriptorium pass in quiet rhythm. Scratch, pause, dip, scratch, pause, dip. The only interruptions are the faint coughs of your neighbors and the occasional shuffle of sandals as someone stretches aching legs. Every so often, a brother raises the candle stub with a sigh, coaxing the melted wax into a steadier pool. It is a delicate balance. Too much tilt, and the flame drowns. Too little, and the light weakens. You remember hearing once that melted wax dripped onto a manuscript could be used to seal in holiness, as if the accidental mark lent extra blessing to the text. A peculiar belief, yes, but one that conveniently excused clumsiness. You glance at the hardened lump beside your work and consider whether to frame it as divine intervention. Your eyes blur as you work, letters beginning to shimmer and double. You rub at them, the scent of ink lingering on your fingertips. Candlelight has its beauty, warm and golden, but it is unforgiving to weary eyes. Reality check. Optometrists are several centuries away, and spectacles, while technically invented, are not exactly standard issue in a monastery. For now, you squint, blink, and carry on because the psalms must be copied whether you can see them clearly or not. The light shifts slowly across the room as candles burn lower. Shadows creep over the walls, elongating the outlines of your brothers bent in concentration. Your quill scratches another word, and you hear a faint sigh beside you, as though the weight of transcribing eternity has settled squarely on human shoulders. Yet there is a kind of peace in the monotony, a stillness in which every letter is a prayer, every word a discipline of the hand and heart. At last, the prior's footsteps echo in the hall, and you know the morning's work is drawing to a close. He pauses at each desk, eyes gliding over the neatness of lines, the steadiness of ink. Your page, though slightly wax-stained, survives his gaze without comment. You exhale softly, grateful for the mercy of silence. The candle between you and your brothers gutters again, its wick nearly consumed. You watch it spit one final spark of wax before settling into a small, steady glow. The scriptorium empties slowly, robes brushing against wood, sandals whispering across stone. You rise too, stretching stiff shoulders, ink smudging faintly against your sleeve. And as you leave the room, the scent of vellum and wax clings to you, following you down the corridor. You rise slowly from your straw mattress, brushing stray stalks from your robe. The candle beside you is little more than a stub now, the wick crackling in protest as it fights for life. You cup your hand around the flame, shielding it from the draft that seems determined to extinguish every spark of comfort in the monastery. The smell of singed wax clings to your fingers, leaving a faint stickiness. Not exactly the perfume of saints, but it will have to do. Ahead lies another task, one involving heat, sealing wax, and more opportunities to spill onto your robe. You leave the scriptorium with stiff shoulders, ink smudges on your sleeve, and the faint relief that your eyes no longer need to squint at parchment. But work follows you. Down another corridor, cooler this time, you are led toward the small chamber where documents are sealed. The air is tinged with smoke and hot wax, heavier than in the chapel, and the warmth of nearby flames greets your face. On the table lies a stack of folded parchments, edges pressed neatly, waiting for final touches. Seals are more than decoration here. They are authority, proof that the contents come with weight, whether from the abbot, the monastery, or occasionally from the wider church. A simple blob of melted wax stamped with a ring or die carries more power than your tired eyes can fathom. In a world where signatures are scarce, wax is l'homme. You reach for a candle stub, its flame wavering with each breath of air. Tilting it carefully, you watch the hot wax begin to drip. It falls in sluggish beads onto the parchment, pooling into a small circle. The smell rises sharp and oily, reminding you again that these candles are made from animal fat. Not a fragrance that inspires awe, but one that clings stubbornly to every robe and sleeve. You lower the parchment slightly too much, and a splash of wax jumps, landing directly on the wool over your thigh. The sensation is both warm and immediate. You jerk back slightly, though you remind yourself, too late, that sudden movements rarely help. The wax hardens quickly, leaving a pale, misshapen blotch in the fibers. Reality check. Robes are not easily laundered, and wax stains are practically eternal. Somewhere in the monastic rules, you suspect, there's a line about careless scorch marks being a sign of inner distraction. You set the parchment aside and reach for the small seal. The iron handle is cold against your fingers, though the stamp itself is warm from sitting near the flame. pressing it into the soft wax leaves behind the intricate emblem of the abbey, a cross surrounded by lines so fine they resemble threads. The mark glistens as it cools, edges rising like miniature walls. For a moment you admire it, even though your robe still carries its own accidental seal of the morning. The work continues in rhythm: candle tilts, wax strips, parchment shifts, seal presses. The room is silent except for the faint hiss of hot wax meeting cooler air. Every so often, a brother mutters softly as wax splashes the wrong way. You hear someone blowing on their sleeve, trying to cool an unintended blotch only to smear it further. Reality check. Monks may copy Holy Scripture with reverence, but they still fumble sealing wax like clumsy apprentices. You remember hearing a peculiar tale told by an older brother that wax spilled across a letter could sometimes be read as a sign of divine favor, a little kiss from heaven. Others argued the opposite, that careless drips suggested Satan's attempt to mar holy words. Conveniently, both interpretations allowed the monk in question to avoid personal blame. You eye the hardened patch on your own robe and wonder if it's a heavenly blessing, or simply a reminder that you are not cut out for candle acrobatics. The warmth of the chamber begins to grow heavy, the scent of wax thick in your nose. Your head dips slightly as you steady the next parchment, fighting the slow weight of drowsiness. The candle flame sways again, shadows leaping across the walls like restless spirits. You keep your hand steady, determined not to add another accidental decoration to your sleeve. At last, the final parchment is sealed. A stack of documents now glistens with red and pale circles, each stamped and cooled. The work is complete, though your robe bears witness to your missteps. You brush at the hardened wax in vain, the rough fabric scratching beneath your fingers. It will remain there, a small relic of the day's labor, visible long after the documents have been carried away. You leave the chamber slowly, stretching your hands to ease the stiffness in your fingers. Behind you the candles flicker on, still burning, still dripping. The dining hall waits at the end of another echoing passage. You join the line of brothers shuffling inside, each of you carrying the silence like another piece of clothing. The hall is wide, cold, and lit by rows of candles that do their best to convince you this is a place of warmth. Their glow falls across the long wooden tables, illuminating the small portions that pass as breakfast. Bread, mostly. Sometimes a small piece of cheese, if the monastery has been blessed with generosity. Ahead, the corridor leads you toward another duty, where wax will once again play its part, this time in the peculiar business of hygiene, or at least what passes for it here. You step into the small chamber set aside for washing, and the cold strikes you first. It rushes up from the flagstones and seeps down from the damp ceiling, wrapping itself around you like a cloak you never asked for. The air smells faintly of stone, water, and smoke carried in from the hall. A single stub of candle flickers on a ledge, its thin light throwing shadows across the room, and doing very little to convince you that this will be a pleasant experience. Your sandals scuff softly as you cross to the basin. It is a simple affair, hewn from stone, filled with water that has had the misfortune of standing long enough to grow cold. You dip your fingers in and instantly regret it. The chill bites at your skin, as though the water has been waiting all morning to make you reconsider your choices. Reality check. Monks were expected to keep themselves clean enough to be presentable, but daily bathing was thought unnecessary, even suspicious. After all, cleanliness was more a spiritual matter than a physical one. You splash water on your face, and the shock snaps you more awake than any chant could. Droplets run down your cheeks, falling onto your robe in dark patches. You rub at your skin briskly, trying to convince yourself that freshness is an achievable state. The candle flame quivers as you move, shadows bending across the stone walls. They seem to mock your efforts, reminding you that this is less a bath and more a ritual of half measures. Your hands run through your hair, dampening it, smoothing it back. The strands cling together, cool against your scalp. You lean closer to the candle stub, tilting your head to catch the light. There is a shard of polished metal hanging on the wall, the closest thing to a mirror the monastery affords. You peer into it and find your reflection dull, blurred, and faintly warped. Reality check. Medieval mirrors were not exactly designed to flatter. They tend to make you look more like a ghost in training than a man of God. Still, you lean closer, searching along your hairline and the folds of your robe. This is less vanity than vigilance. Monks often use these rare washing moments to check for fleas or lice, the small companions that thrived in straw bedding and woolen habits. You part the fabric at your sleeve and look carefully in the weak light. The candle flickers, barely revealing the details. You sigh, deciding that if you can't see them, perhaps they can't see you either, a comforting if delusional conclusion. You reach for a cloth, rough and scratchy, and run it across your arms. The fibers scrape against your skin, raising more redness than cleanliness. Still, there is something grounding in the sensation, a reminder that you are at least making an attempt. Somewhere in the rule book, the emphasis is less on gleaming skin and more on obedience. You clean because you must, not because anyone expects you to sparkle afterward. The candle continues to burn lower, its wax pooling at the base. A drop spills over, hissing as it meets the cold stone ledge. You glance at it, half amused by the drama of such a small event. A peculiar superstition lingers in your memory. Some said that if a candle dripped heavily during washing, it foretold rain for the coming day. You rub the damp cloth along your jaw and think, not unreasonably, that you could have predicted rain without needing wax to confirm it. Your robe grows heavier as patches of water sink into the wool. You rub at them with the cloth, though the effort is more symbolic than effective. Damp wool carries its own peculiar odor, a mix of earth and sheep that clings to your hands as you work. Still, the act of washing, however modest, leaves you a little more awake, a little more settled in your skin. At last, you place the cloth aside, letting it slump in the basin. You straighten your robe, brush dampness from your sleeves, and glance one final time at the metal shard on the wall. The candlelight shows a weary face, softened by shadows. You breathe slowly, accepting that this is as clean as the morning allows. You lift the candle stub from its ledge and step back into the corridor. The flame wavers in the draft, guiding you onward. Ahead lies the chapter house, where rules will be read and, unfortunately for some, misuses of candles will be discussed at length. You carry your candle stub carefully down the corridor, the wax cooling into odd little ridges along its side. And, more often than not, beer, thin, weak, and safer to drink than water pulled from the river. You take your place at the bench, lowering yourself onto the hard wood. Before you sits a slice of bread, dark and dense, more stone than loaf. Still, you tear a piece free, the crust crumbling against your teeth. It tastes faintly of smoke from the oven, a reminder that the cook stokes fires long before any of you stir. The air is cooler here, and the faint smell of damp stone follows you as you step into the chapter house. This is where the community gathers not for prayer, but for rules, the kind of gathering where the soul is nourished less by scripture and more by stern reminders of economy. The benches creak as brothers take their places. You settle down, robe rustling against the rough wood, and fold your hands neatly in your lap. And through the center, a taller candle burns steadily, as if it knows its role is not simply to give light, but to illuminate authority. The prior clears his throat, and the hall stills. His voice rises, smooth and deliberate, like a quill scratching across parchment. Today's subject: candle economy. You bow your head slightly, though your ears remain alert. Too many candles burned unnecessarily. Too many stubs shortened. Too much wax spent in places where, apparently, divine light is not strictly required. The list continues, as detailed as an account book. Reality check. You live in a world where wax is wealth. Beeswax especially, prized for its cleaner burn, is costly enough to rival silver in certain markets. To waste even a stub is to throw away resources the Abbey cannot afford. The prior pauses on one particularly grievous offense: candles in the latrine. You blink, trying not to smile. Evidently, some brother had been lighting a taper while visiting the privy at night. Perhaps he thought it practical, or perhaps he feared what might lurk in the dark corners. Either way, the act has now become the morning's cautionary tale. You are reminded, firmly, that salvation does not hinge on seeing the chamber pot clearly. The lecture continues. You shift on the bench, feeling the cold edge press against your back. Around you, the brothers nod gravely, though a few eyes wander toward the high windows where the weak morning light seeps through. The candle in the center of the room crackles softly, as though mocking the irony of being sacrificed purely to emphasize thrift. Your thoughts drift to the peculiar rules you've heard before. Some monasteries measured candle stubs and kept records of how quickly they burned, suspicious of brothers who seemed to consume light more greedily than others. A curious level of scrutiny, though it matches the medieval fondness for seeing sin in even the smallest details. Reality check. Heaven may care about your humility, but the abbot certainly cares about the wax budget. The prior's voice softens slightly, reminding the brothers that candles are not for comfort, but for necessity. You are to be guided by the light of God, not the glow of a stub in your chamber whenever you feel nervous. There is a murmured Amen, more dutiful than inspired, and the lecture draws to its close. The candle at the center is extinguished with a careful pinch, a symbolic act to prove the lesson's point. You rise with the others, your legs stiff from sitting. The sound of sandals shuffles against the floor as the brothers disperse, each carrying the reminder that wax is precious, candles are sacred, and frivolity has no place in the cloister. You glance at the smear of hardened wax still clinging to your robe and decide, wisely, not to draw attention to it today. The corridor outside feels lighter, the air less heavy with reproach. You walk slowly, your stub of candle pressed carefully into your palm. Ahead lies the chapel once more, where the peculiar intersection of rules, superstition, and candlelight continues in ways you have not yet endured. You shuffle back through the corridor, robe brushing the stone as you go, and find yourself led toward another gathering, this time not in the chapter house, but near the cloister where the sisters once walked. The room feels different, quieter, as though it has absorbed centuries of whispered debate. A single candle burns on the table, its flame steady but subdued, like it too knows the subject of the day requires caution. The topic is peculiar, even by monastic standards: women and candles. You sit, hands folded, and listen as the elder monk reads from the rules. His voice is calm but carries an unmistakable edge, as if the words themselves are fragile and must be handled carefully. Women, it seems, are not to light candles in certain circumstances. Whether the reason is superstition, theology, or a lingering suspicion of Eve's apple incident, no one dares ask aloud. The candle wavers slightly in its holder, throwing long shadows across the stone. You watch the flame and imagine how absurd this must look from the outside, grown men debating which hand a nun might use to strike a flint. Beside the bread, an earthenware cup waits, filled with liquid that smells vaguely of grain. You raise it and take a sip. It's thin ale, barely alcoholic, brewed not for pleasure, but survival. Reality check. Monks drank beer because water could carry sickness, though the beverage is more liquid bread than tavern delight. The only sounds in the hall are small and ordinary. The shuffle of feet, the scraping of wooden spoons against bowls, the occasional cough swallowed quickly into a sleeve. Reality check. In a world where famine, sickness, and war still press at the gates, energy is spent on deciding who is permitted to coax fire from wax. Priorities, it seems, are always up for debate. One brother clears his throat and recites an old belief that a candle lit improperly by a woman could invite misfortune, not just upon herself, but upon the entire community. A peculiar superstition, yet one that lingers with weight. He does not say what kind of misfortune, leaving you to imagine anything from spoiled bread to locusts. You resist the urge to smile, aware that the topic is treated with solemnity here. The air is cool, but the faint scent of wax drifts again into your nose, familiar now after so many hours. You shift your weight on the bench, the wood pressing uncomfortably against your thigh, and let your gaze wander across the faces of the brothers. They look serious, as though the very balance of heaven depends on which hands strike which sparks. You wonder briefly if the saints, watching from above, are sighing in amusement. The candle sputters, and for a moment, the flame nearly dies. A draft curls through the room, rattling the shutters. The brothers pause, eyes flicking toward the weak flame as though it too has an opinion on the matter. Someone rises, cups his hand around the wick, and steadies it again. Light returns, and with it, the lecture continues. Reality check. Mirrors were poor, baths were rare, and candles cost nearly as much as a day's labor, yet gendered rules about wax still found their way into the ledger of monastic life. You tuck the thought away, careful not to let it show on your face. The gathering ends quietly. The candle on the table is pinched out, sending a curl of smoke into the air. It drifts upward, carrying with it the peculiar gravity of the rule just discussed. You stand, stretching your stiff legs, and follow the line of brothers back into the cloister. Outside, the day feels older, the light through the windows stronger. Your stomach reminds you it is nearly time for the midday meal, and as you walk toward the refectory, you know that even there candles will have their say, marking not theology this time, but simply when you are permitted to put down your spoon. Above it all, the candles burn steadily, wax dripping in slow streams down their sides. One, positioned near your elbow, seems particularly unruly. Its wax dribbles faster than the others, pooling dangerously close to your sleeve. You edge your arm away, deciding that immolation before breakfast is not the kind of martyrdom you had in mind. Silence is part of the rule here. You do not speak as you eat. Words are unnecessary when bread and beer are the only subjects of discussion. Instead, you listen to the crackle of flames, the faint hiss of wax falling into molten pools. The prior at the far table raises his head occasionally, scanning the room with calm authority. His presence is a reminder that even in silence, you are never unobserved. You chew slowly, letting your teeth grind through the tough loaf. Monks are supposed to eat with humility, avoiding any sign of haste or greed, which is fine, except that the bread is so hard it demands humility anyway. A quirky belief floats through your memory that crumbs scattered across the table could attract angels or demons depending on how they fell. You glance down at the small trail left by your crust and wonder whether you've just summoned a holy presence or a very tiny nuisance. The candles flicker again, their light bending in a draft that sneaks through cracks in the shutters. Shadows dance across the long tables, shifting over bowls and cups, gliding across tired faces bent toward food. You lower your head, grateful for even this simple fare. Hunger is not choosy. The meal does not last long. Bread disappears, cups are drained, and the hall slowly empties. You rise with the others, tucking your hands into your sleeves against the cold. The candles still burn as you leave, their flames watching silently from the tables. Behind you, the smell of bread lingers, faint but grounding, a reminder that simplicity defines this life. The corridor awaits once again, carrying you onward. You make your way toward the refectory once more, the familiar scent of bread and broth drifting faintly through the corridor. This time, though, there is something heavier in the air. The knowledge that your meal will be measured not by appetite, but by the lifespan of a candle. You step inside and find the long tables already set, the brothers filing in with the same quiet rhythm as before. A single tall candle burns at the center of the hall. It is not for decoration. Silence hangs thick, broken only by the faint hiss of wax dripping down the candle's side. The rules are clear. If you have erred, you step forward and stand beside the flame. It marks you, not with fire, but with visibility. Reality check. In a place built on humility, nothing humbles quite like being illuminated for all to see, while you confess you overslept or spoke out of turn. The first brother rises. Sandals scrape softly as he walks to the candle. His face glows unevenly in the flickering light, shadows deepening the lines of weariness around his eyes. He bows his head and admits his fault, dozing during prayer. The room remains quiet, the candle flame swaying slightly, as if it too nods in solemn agreement. You watch as another brother steps forward. This one confesses to speaking out of turn during work. His voice is low, almost lost beneath the faint crackle of the candle. A curious custom, you recall, says that if the flame flutters when a confession is spoken, it means the words are truly heartfelt. You glance at the wick, noticing it tremble faintly, though whether from truth or draught you cannot say. When your turn comes, your feet feel heavier than your body. You rise, heart steady but unwilling. Each step toward the candle is a reminder of your own small faults. You pause beside the flame, the warmth licking gently at your cheek. Shadows dance across your robe, and every eye in the room rests quietly on you. You bow your head and admit your failing, perhaps a moment's inattention in the scriptorium, or a grumble whispered too audibly when the bread was too hard. Small sins, but sins nonetheless. The candle watches, unblinking. Wax gathers at its base in slow layers, as though recording each word with patient permanence. You wonder whether anyone in future centuries will scrape these hardened ridges and imagine what truths they once accompanied. Reality check. Most likely, someone will just complain about the mess. You return to your bench, lighter in spirit, but heavier in limb. The confessions continue, one by one, each brother stepping into the glow, speaking quietly, and returning to his place. The candle remains constant, its flame a small witness to human frailty. At last, the prior closes the ritual. He reminds the community that humility is strength, that silence is balm, and that wax, apparently, is an excellent listener. The candle is extinguished with care, and smoke spirals into the air, carrying with it the faint sense of release. You rise with the others, sandals scuffing softly as you leave the chapter house. The air in the corridor feels lighter, as though the stone walls themselves have exhaled. Ahead, work awaits once more, and for those less fortunate, candle-related punishments await as well. You file out of the chapter house with the others, your robe brushing lightly against the cool stone. The air in the cloister feels thinner now, lighter perhaps, though that could simply be relief that confession is over. But relief never lasts long here. Soon enough, the prior calls for attention again. This time the matter is not about prayer or psalms, but about penance. And penance, as you've learned, often comes wrapped in candlelight. You sit back down on the bench, listening as names are read. Brothers who whispered too freely, who lingered in their straw beds too long, who wasted wax in dark corners where no flame was truly needed. For them there is a peculiar sentence, tending the chapel candles at night. Reality check. When punishments involve staying awake in a cold stone church with nothing but dripping wax for company, you begin to suspect the system was designed less for correction and more for creative misery. One brother stands, head bowed, as his penance is announced. He will remain through the night to watch the candles in the nave, making sure they neither sputter nor burn out too quickly. The task sounds holy, but anyone who has kept such a vigil knows the truth. It is mostly a long struggle against drowsiness while your toes go numb on frozen flagstones. You remember the last time you yourself were given that duty. The chapel at night is a different world. The flicker of flames stretching shadows so tall they seem to climb the columns, the hiss of wax falling into hardened pools, the sound of mice scratching faintly in the corners. It is a clock, a silent overseer of your eating. The prior has already explained it countless times. Monks eat in silence until the appointed candle burns down to its mark. No more, no less. Reality check. In modern terms, it is like a kitchen timer, except it drips wax on the table, smokes faintly into your eyes, and sometimes cheats you out of a decent portion by burning faster than expected. You sit at the bench and bow your head. The air grows colder with each passing hour, and your eyelids grow heavier. But the rules are clear. Should any candle die unattended, your penance begins again. The prior continues reading. Another brother will scrub the hardened wax that has spilled onto the choir stalls. A small task, but hardly enviable. The ridges cling stubbornly to the wood, as if determined to become part of the furniture. A peculiar belief lingers here, too. Some claim that scraping away candle drips during penance helps scrape away sins as well. You think it's convenient theology, but you don't say so. The candle at the center of the room flickers steadily, as though it agrees with every judgment passed. Shadows move across bowed heads, making each monk look more solemn than the last. The silence deepens, broken only by the voice assigning tasks. You glance at your own sleeve, where hardened wax still clings faintly from your earlier mishap. You shift your arm to hide it. Reality check. If someone noticed, you could easily find yourself back in the chapel tonight, blinking through shadows and regretting every careless tilt of a candle stub. At last, the list ends. Those assigned to penance bow deeply and accept their fates. The candle is extinguished, its smoke curling upward like a final punctuation. The room empties, robes sweeping quietly across the floor, sandals whispering into the corridor. You step outside, grateful that your name was not called this time. The air in the cloister feels cooler, but freer. And as you move along, you sense the change in the weather. A breeze rising, a storm approaching. Soon candles will have more to contend with than careless hands. You step out into the cloister, and the first thing you notice is the draft. It curls around the arches, tugging at your robe like an impatient child. The light filtering through the narrow windows is darker now, heavy with clouds that press low against the sky. The storm you sensed earlier has arrived, and with it, the uneasy relationship between weather and flame. You follow the brothers back into the chapel, where dozens of candles stand proud along the altar and choir stalls. Their flames flicker as the wind threads through cracks in the shutters. The chanting begins once more, voices low and steady, but already the candles waver. You fix your gaze on one near the front, its flame bending nearly sideways. The wax drips unevenly, running down in quick rivulets. Reality check. It's difficult to contemplate divine mysteries when you're mostly wondering if hot wax will splash onto your bare toes. The storm outside grows louder. Rain lashes against the shutters, rattling them in their frames. A low rumble of thunder rolls across the sky, and the sound seems to vibrate in the stone walls. One by one, candles tremble and sputter, some recovering, others surrendering with a faint hiss. Darkness pushes in from the corners of the chapel, broken only by the few flames that manage to survive. You hear a sharp intake of breath from the row ahead as a tall candle at the altar finally gives up, its flame snuffed by a sudden draft. A wisp of smoke curls upward, thin and defiant, before vanishing into the rafters. The chanting continues, though you can sense the unease it causes. Candles, after all, are more than mere light here. They are symbols of presence, prayers made visible. And now the storm has silenced one. A curious detail comes to mind. Some believed that storms carried spirits, and when a candle was extinguished by a sudden gust, it meant something unseen had slipped inside the church. You glance toward the darkened corner and tell yourself it is only superstition. Still, the hairs on your neck do not entirely agree. The brothers continue singing, voices steady, as though pretending nothing unusual has happened. But the shadows grow bolder, reaching across the stone floor. More flames sputter, some clinging stubbornly, others fading with soft-paced reality check. It is hard to maintain the illusion of solemn serenity when half the congregation is squinting into near darkness, trying not to trip over their own sandals. The prior lifts his hand, signaling calm. Another brother hurries forward with a taper, shielding it with both hands as he relights the fallen candles. His movements are careful, reverent, though the draft nearly defeats him more than once. Each new flame seems fragile, a thin rebellion against the storm outside. The servers move quietly among the rows, placing bowls of pottage, a thick mixture of grain, vegetables, and whatever scraps the garden or cellar has provided. The steam curls upward, carrying with it a faint earthy smell, both humble and filling. Beside it, a slice of coarse bread waits, dark and heavy as usual. The candle flame glows steadily above all this, watching like a sentinel. The first bite warms your stomach, and you are grateful for it. At last, the chanting ends. The few surviving candles glow in uneven clusters, like islands in a sea of shadow. The storm still growls beyond the walls, but within the chapel, the ritual has held. The prior nods, and the community bows their heads one final time. You rise with the others, legs stiff, and file slowly out. Behind you, the chapel remains dim, its candles weary but not entirely defeated. The rain patters more gently now, easing into a steady rhythm. And as you walk the corridor, you know your next duty lies not in prayer or punishment, but in tending to those weakened by sickness, where candles, once again, will be called upon to serve in curious ways. You step into the infirmary, the air heavy with the scents of herbs, smoke, and damp wool. The walls are close here, the ceiling lower, and the candlelight softer than in the chapel. Rows of pallets line the room, each with a figure lying beneath coarse blankets. Some breathe shallowly, others cough, their voices muffled against cloth. The quiet is punctuated only by the faint hiss of wax dripping into iron holders. You place a candle by the bedside of a sick brother. The flame burns low but steady, its light falling across his face. In monasteries, candles are not just practical, they are protective. The belief lingers that flame drives away evil spirits, keeping them from lingering too close to the ill. Reality check. In truth, the only thing the candle reliably drives away is darkness, and occasionally anyone with a sensitive nose for tallow smoke. You dip a cloth into a small bowl of water steeped with herbs. The scent of rosemary rises sharply, mixed with the sweeter hint of lavender. You wipe the brother's forehead, the cool cloth soothing his fever. The candle flickers as you move, shadows shifting over his face, as though the flame is uncertain whether to stay or flee. You steady the holder with your free hand, whispering a quiet prayer. Another pallet nearby carries a younger monk. He stares at the flame by his bed with wide, glassy eyes, convinced that as long as it burns, so too will his strength. A peculiar belief indeed, but one that gives him comfort. You watch him breathe easier in its glow, and you let the candle burn, though you know wax is rationed and questions may come later. Sometimes peace matters more than rules. The infirmary moves quietly between beds, checking cloths, stirring pots, adjusting blankets. His sandals whisper across the floor, but the room remains hushed. You hear the faint rattle of pestles grinding herbs, the bubbling of a pot simmering near the hearth. Candlelight glints off the metal rim of the cauldron, then dances along the damp stone walls. You adjust another blanket, tucking it beneath a shivering shoulder. The wool is coarse, rough against your hands, but it carries the faint warmth of body heat. The candle beside the pallet sputters, smoke curling upward before steadying again. Reality check. The flame does little to heal, but it reassures. A small, stubborn promise in a world where medicine is often guesswork and prayer stands in for cure. Your gaze lingers on the hardened wax pooling at the base of another holder. Some say those drips, once cooled, can be scraped and carried as talismans against illness. You recall an older brother who once tucked such a piece into his sleeve, insisting it protected him from fever. You never asked whether it worked, though you noticed he kept coughing just the same. The room grows warmer as more candles are lit, the faint glow gathering into something like comfort. Shadows soften, and the coughing eases into a lull. You breathe deeply, letting the scent of herbs mix with the faint sweetness of wax. At last, your part is done for now. You step quietly away, leaving the infirmary to his watch. The corridor beyond feels cooler, the storm's breath still lingering in the draft. And as you move along, you know the next time candles will gather will not be to comfort the sick, but to accompany the dead on their final walk through the cloister. You leave the infirmary with the heaviness of herbs still clinging to your robe. The air outside feels sharper, cleaner, though the storm has left the stones damp beneath your sandals. A bell tolls slowly, each note sinking into the cloister with a weight you know well. It is the sound that calls not to prayer, nor to work, but to farewell. A brother has died, and the community must see him to rest. You gather with the others in the nave where the body lies on a simple bier. The broth is thin, but the barley has softened enough to give it weight. Silence fills the hall, broken only by the sound of spoons scraping and the occasional sniffle from cold noses. The candle crackles softly, and you glance up at it, measuring how much time remains before the wax dips past the mark. A memory surfaces of a curious rule you once heard. If the candle burned unevenly during meals, it was said to be a sign of poor discipline among the brothers. His robe is plain, his hands folded over his chest, and beside him a line of candles burns in solemn order. Their flames rise straight and steady, as though they know this task is different from all others. Here wax is not measured in thrift or punishment, but in honor. Reality check. The wax will still leave stubborn stains on the wooden floor, but today, no one will complain. The procession begins. You take your place in the line, a taper in your hand. Its light glows faintly against the damp walls as the brothers move forward in silence. The air smells of smoke and stone, with an undertone of rain still seeping through the cloister arches. Sandals scuff softly, the sound blending with the occasional drip of water from the eaves. The bier moves slowly, carried by 4 brothers. Their shoulders strain under the weight, though their faces remain calm. Candles surround them, each flame swaying as the procession winds through the cloister walk. Shadows dance along the arches, stretching and bending with every step. You tighten your grip on your taper, careful not to spill wax on your robe again. It would be poor form to scorch yourself in the middle of a funeral. A curious belief runs through your mind that each candle lit during a funeral is a light to guide the departed soul through darkness, ensuring he does not stumble on his way to eternity. You glance at the wavering flames, imagining them as lanterns along an unseen road. It is a comforting thought, even if, realistically, no soul ever complained about the absence of beeswax illumination. The chanting begins, low and resonant. The words ripple gently through the cloister, a hymn of release and remembrance. The candle flames catch the rhythm of the song, bending in unison with the breath of voices. You add your voice too, quiet but steady, feeling the vibration of chant hum in your chest. The procession reaches the small graveyard beyond the cloister wall. The wind greets you here, stronger, tugging at the flames. Some bend, some nearly die, but the brothers shield them with cupped hands. The bier is lowered, the earth waits, and the chanting deepens. The candles now form a small circle of light against the gray of the storm-heavy sky. As the earth closes over the body, one candle finally gives out, snuffed by the wind. A curl of smoke rises, twisting into the air. No one moves to relight it. The symbolism is obvious. The light here has ended, but others burn on. Reality check. Wax and flame make convenient metaphors, even if they leave your fingers sticky and your robes spotted with drips. At last, the procession turns back. Candles still glow in the gathering dusk, guiding the brothers along the path. The smoke of extinguished tapers lingers faintly in the air, mixing with the scent of wet earth. You walk slowly, the weight of the moment pressing but not crushing, your flame still alive in your hand, and as you step back into the cloister, the silence wraps around you again. Soon enough, you will return to the dormitory, where the last candle of the day will sputter and fade. A smaller ending, but an ending all the same. You return to the dormitory after the burial, your sandals whispering over the stone floor. The air feels heavier now, touched by incense and damp earth still clinging to your robe. The brothers settle into their places, each moving quietly to his straw pallet. At the far end of the long chamber, a single candle burns. Its light stretches faintly across the rows of beds, offering just enough glow to guide you through the shadows. You lower yourself onto your bedding, the straw rustling beneath you. It pricks your skin through the robe, but you shift until the sharp edges are at least tolerable. The air is cold, a draft curling down from the high, unshuttered windows. The candle flame bends with each sigh of wind, though it clings stubbornly to life. This final vigil candle is not for reading, nor for comfort. It is simply a watchful presence, meant to burn until the last of you has slipped into sleep. Reality check. In practice, it is a stub of wax expected to endure far longer than it reasonably should, sputtering and smoking until it finally gives up. You turn on your side, eyes half closed, and watch the flame dance. Shadows sway across the beams above, stretching and shrinking with each flicker. For a moment, the play of light is almost hypnotic, the world shrinking to nothing more than fire and darkness. The brother nearest the candle coughs softly, the sound echoing through the chamber. Peculiar logic, considering wax has its own mind, but perhaps it was easier to blame restless monks than uncooperative tallow. You keep your eyes low, spoon steady, hoping no one notices the flame leaning slightly to one side. Your sleeve brushes the edge of the table, and you feel a faint tackiness where wax has dripped in the past. Hardened ridges cling to the wood, small relics of meals long finished. He shifts, adjusts his robe, then lies still again. The room settles once more into near silence, the faint breathing of dozens of men, the occasional creak of straw, the distant drip of water somewhere in the stone. It is a symphony of small sounds, a reminder that peace, is never entirely silent. The candle sputters, throwing sparks of wax down its side. You remember the prior's lecture on thrift and smile faintly in the darkness. Every drop of wax, every stub of wick is accounted for. And yet here it burns away slowly, sacrificed not to illuminate Scripture, but to soothe weary minds into sleep. A peculiar economy, perhaps, but one that feels kinder than most. You close your eyes again, letting your breathing match the rhythm of the flame's flicker. Your body softens against the straw, though the stiffness of the day lingers in your shoulders. The candle continues its vigil, small and patient, its light shrinking with each passing moment. At last, your thoughts blur, the flame a faint shimmer behind closed lids. You drift at the edge of sleep, knowing the candle will fade before long. And when it does, the room will be left to darkness, carrying you all toward another day that begins, inevitably, in the same dim light. And as you hover between waking and dreams, you sense tomorrow's duties already waiting, the chores, the prayers, and yes, more wax upon your hands. The dormitory grows quieter as the hours slip by, the straw rustling only when a brother shifts in his sleep. The last candle still burns at the far end, its stub short now, the flame wavering with each draft that finds its way through the stone walls. You lie awake, eyes fixed on it, watching the small dance of light as though it holds secrets you might learn if you only stare long enough. The smell of tallow drifts faintly through the air, mingled with the sharper tang of cold stone and the mustiness of wool. Your fingers still carry a faint stickiness from handling wax throughout the day. You rub them absently against your robe, though the hardened blotches there prove such stains rarely leave you. Reality check. No amount of piety makes wax less clingy. The flame sputters suddenly, bending low as if bowing. For a moment you wonder if it will vanish, leaving the chamber in darkness. But it steadies again, flickering stubbornly. Unwilling to surrender just yet, there is something oddly comforting in that persistence, as though even a stub of wax knows its duty. You close your eyes, then open them again, caught between drowsiness and watchfulness. Around you, soft snores rise and fall. One brother mutters faintly in his sleep, the words of a psalm carried half into dream. The candle's glow touches his face, softening the lines of weariness, then withdraws as the flame leans the other way. A peculiar thought drifts through your mind. Some say the last candle in the dormitory carries the prayers of the day heavenward, like smoke rising invisibly through the rafters. You are not sure whether to believe it, but the idea soothes you. After all, it's comforting to imagine that each drip of wax, each sputter of light, has meaning beyond itself. The wax pools at the base, bubbling faintly before hardening. Shadows stretch long across the beams, then shrink again. The candle stutters once more, the wick curling into itself, flame fluttering like a weary breath. Your own eyelids grow heavier in sympathy. Finally, the flame dies, leaving a thin thread of smoke curling into the air. Darkness folds over the chamber like a heavy blanket, settling against the straw, the stone, the slow rhythm of breathing. For a moment you can still smell the ghost of wax, faintly sweet, faintly bitter. You shift on your palate, feeling the straw prick at your shoulder. Sleep draws closer now, soft and steady, like the tide pulling you out to sea. Tomorrow will begin in the same dim chill, with the same stubborn flames. But for now there is nothing more to do, nothing more to tend. You breathe deeply, letting the rhythm of the dormitory carry you. And as your thoughts dissolve into dream, you know that wax and prayer, shadow and silence, have guided you through yet another day. End of script. Sweet dreams. You smile to yourself, an odd kind of history written in wax, less grand than Scripture, but no less stubborn in its survival. The candle continues its slow descent, wax pooling at the base. You eat steadily, chewing each bite with deliberate calm. Reality check. The idea is to eat mindfully, grateful for each crumb, but the truth is that hunger sometimes makes you count the notches of the candle more often than the blessings in your bowl. At last, the wax reaches its line. The prior lifts his head, and instantly the room stills. Spoons are lowered, bowls half full or empty, depending on one's luck with timing. The candle has spoken. The meal is over. There is no debate. You bow your head once more, offering a silent prayer, and the benches scrape as the brothers rise in unison. You follow them out, your stomach warmed, but not quite satisfied. Hunger lingers like a faint shadow, though you remind yourself that discipline, not comfort, is the point here. The candle behind you burns on for a moment longer before being pinched out, its smoke curling into the rafters. The corridor ahead stretches toward the chapter hall once again. This time it will not be rules about eating or drinking, but the more delicate matter of confession, and once more, candles will play their curious role. You step back into the chapter house, where the air feels heavier than before. The benches creak again as the brothers file in, each row brushing against the stone floor. At the center of the room, a candle burns, taller than the stubs you've carried, steadier than the wax clocks in the refectory. This one is not meant for timekeeping or light. It is meant for something far less comfortable: confession. The prior begins the ritual with calm gravity, reminding the community that every soul carries faults and every fault must be spoken aloud.